Hello, Loud Teachers, and welcome to Learning is Not Quiet presents the Sinking Soda Lab. Today, I'm going to go through how I teach this particular product found in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. If you're finding this on YouTube, as always, links are in the description. I'm going to go through some of the successes of this lab, some of the pitfalls you might want to try to avoid when teaching this experiment. I'm also going to go through the differentiations and what groups of students that goes with if you've purchased this product. Please note that most of the science products available in my store are available in Spanish and English, as well as have several different differentiations. So for this product, there is a high level, a medium level, and a low level. And at the end of this video, I'm going to go through which differentiation I use for which group and how you can kind of determine which is the best fit for your students with the 4 different versions. So if you have purchased or are interested in purchasing this product, you may also be interested in this scientific method word wall, only $1. Prices are subject to change. This scientific interactive notebook, again, Spanish, English, and differentiations. These notes on the scientific method, now available in distance learning form. I have all kinds of PBL products, more lab experiments, and of course, everything for the scientific method is available in one giant, much cheaper bundle for you. And hopefully this makes teaching science more fun, more interesting for your students, and really gets them doing hands-on activities out of their seats and loving science. So without further ado, let's get started. So you want to open up this particular product with the question. And I always follow kind of that basic format of the scientific method. Obviously, with older students, they would be able to design an experiment off of the question alone. But for younger students, especially like 5th grade through middle school, I find it really important to practice what we preach and really follow that scientific method. It only takes a couple extra minutes and it's totally worth it. And another thing too is more and more in language arts, we are asking science type questions or making students read nonfiction science text. So it's really important that students have this background scaffolded knowledge, as well as in math. More and more science language is finding its way into those standardized tests as well. And obviously, science is important for students' long-term success. And it's just a wonderful subject, way to get students interested in STEAM. So that's my little pedestal about how I teach the scientific method and why it's so important to hit on that all throughout the year. If you purchase any lab from my store, in addition to being differentiated, in addition to being in Spanish, it will always follow the same format so students get really accustomed to identifying the variables, going through the method, and just feel really comfortable with that language of science and how scientific processes work. So this question is, does shaking a can of soda affect whether it will sink or float? Then I have students do their hypothesis. So this is kind of the medium version that gives a sentence stem. Obviously, the more advanced version, I expect students to use the if-then model. And the more basic version, students are just circling. So students write their hypothesis, their educated guess. Then I always have students identify the variables, independent, dependent, constants, and data type. You would not believe how many adults still struggle with this term. So really important, not just to teach it during your scientific method unit, but to actually apply it to real science experiments and to keep hitting it throughout the year. So then these are kind of the answers. And in particular with the independent variable, it's whether the soda is shaken or not and what brand of soda it is. Notice how there's an and, right? So I actually have 2 independent variables in this experiment. This is the only lab in my store that has 2 independent variables. And I put this during the scientific method unit because I want students to experience what it's like to have 2 independent variables and how it's really hard to make a conclusion when you don't have one independent variable. So it really helps students understand why we need to have one independent variable at a time. And in the end, I always have a discussion about how we could make this lab better and more accurate. So students will say something like, well, we should get 12 of the same soda, and the only thing we change is whether we shake it or not. Students will also say we should just test brands. We should get a whole bunch of different kinds of brands and see whether they sink or float or not. So that's a great extension on this activity when you're done, and a great thing to have students write an essay about as well. So once we've established the variables, I then do the experiment. And I have done this experiment, oh my gosh, at least 10 times with different classes. And what you want to do is you want to shake the soda or not shake the soda, and notice that I have regular and diet versions. I do not specify which brand that you get because really it doesn't matter. Just make sure that you have regular and diet versions. The regular soda sinks if it's not shaken because it has sugar in it, real sugar, which is much more dense. And again, using that language of science, and it sinks to the bottom. Once it is shaken, it increases the amount of air bubbles in it, which makes it less dense and floats to the top. Diet soda does not have real sugar in it, which is less dense. So even though they're the same volume, it floats to the top. So that's kind of a key concept of density to start introducing to the students at this point in the year. But again, notice how there's two independent variables. And what I do, I've done this different ways where I have students work on something else in their table groups or at their lab tables while I pull groups of students back and we do this experiment. The one problem with that is the soda cans do get shaken the more you do this lab, especially if you're letting students put it into the tub, especially if you're a middle school teacher who has to do this a lot of times per day. It might be beneficial. I've also done this where I have a clear tub in front of the classroom and I put them in front of the whole class and they make their observations. It's still a very powerful experiment. So make your life a little bit easier. That's kind of what I recommend if you have to do this over and over again. If you're a fifth grade teacher, fourth grade teacher, and you are able to pull students back in groups and get a little bit of extra soda, obviously that might be a little bit more meaningful. One of my favorite memories with this was my first year teaching. I had a student who had very severe intellectual disabilities. They were nonverbal, and they really were not participating in my class. And as a new teacher, I wasn't sure how to involve them in my class. And I felt just guilty every single day that I wasn't doing more. And through this lab, they started to become really excited about science because I let them be the person in front of the whole class who put the soda in. And they were so excited. The whole class was like really into it and supporting them. And so that's just kind of my way of saying, don't forget to include students with disabilities in the scientific process. It's so meaningful, and science is important to them just like it is to every other student. So that student became my scientific experimental helper, and that was just a great way to include them. Since then, I have developed better worksheets to help students with severe or to moderate intellectual disabilities participate in the process of science. So the students are collecting the data, qualitative data, whether it sinks or floats. Beyond this, I have students do their conclusion, and I'm going to go through all of the different ways that I differentiate this. So this is kind of the most advanced version. You'll notice there's no sentence stems. It's just a little bit more intense. This is the Spanish version, available as all included in this product. This is the medium level. So this is actually going back. If you're a middle school teacher, this is definitely the version I would use with most of my students. This is the version I use most often. My one exception is I taught in a school where students really hadn't been exposed to science before. So I used this version with everyone, and then I used this version with my gifted and talented students. This version should really be for a very specific purpose. So this Spanish version is for if you're in a Spanish immersion school and you're teaching science in Spanish. It's the same, but translated of the highest level worksheet. This is also great if you have students from Spanish-speaking countries who are able to read and write in Spanish. So it really depends on the students. I've had students from Spanish-speaking countries who have attended school in their home country. You know, I've even had so many students who are ESOL students and also gifted and talented. So they're very smart, but they don't know English yet. This is a great way to make them feel so comfortable and confident and just continue learning the language of science in their home language. For students who have not gone to school very much, are not as good at reading and writing in Spanish, which does happen, especially in some countries where students are intimidated to go to school. This is not the right worksheet for them because it's pretty high level. What I would use is the lowest level worksheet with your level 1 ESOL if they do not have strong Spanish skills, or of course, if they have a different language other than Spanish. So these two versions, this medium one and this low one, can be used with special education students as well as students who are English language learners. This is probably for WIDA 3+. This is great for students who have like moderate to light disabilities and they just need sentence stems on their IEP or whatever it might be. This is a great way just to quickly differentiate it. And what I really am proud of is that I made this worksheet look very similar to this worksheet and this worksheet so that I can pass out different versions of the worksheet and students don't even know. If you buy my whole bundle, what I do is I actually make pre-differentiated packets, and then I give the students the packets at the beginning of the unit with all of the activities in it, you know, all of the interactive notebooks, all of the lab activities, all of the extensions and writing and notes and things like that. And students are so accustomed to differentiation in my classroom that they don't even bat twice. They're not looking at each other's papers to be like, ooh, did you get the easier one? Did you get the harder one? And honestly, it's so much more embarrassing and invasive to students to have them being pulled out of the class as opposed to really giving them the power to do what they're able to do with a little bit of differentiation. So this is also for students who have pretty severe intellectual disabilities. I love watching these students who sometimes have never been included in science before really find their voice in the language of science. So with this, like I said, there are questions that come after this about density and about analyzing the results of this experiment. Some extensions you can do, like I said, you can have students redesign the experiment and talk about why this isn't a perfect scientific method design. It uses two variables. The other thing that is a great way to use this is to have students use a bar graph and graph the data of how many sunk, how many floated. And so if you really want to be creative and you really want to spend more time on this as well, if you have like a middle school model where you're changing classes all the time, you can get an average from each class, how many sunk, how many floated, and then find the mean and graph that data in the end as well. So those are just different ways to use this. I hope you learned something. I hope that you liked this video and it helps you decide how and whether to use this in your classroom. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for teaching and training the next generation of scientists. Adios.